Okay, I think we're going to get started soon. George, could you just round them up and close the door so we can get started? Where's your class, Gregory? Okay, go to your class. It's okay, Nanny. Nanny, inner peace, tranquility down. If she wants to come in here. Oh. Yeah, it's closing. It's just on a very slow spring. Okay, people are shuffling in, so I'll wait just one more minute. Okay, that's good. All right, in the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. We're going to continue in our book. The Paradise of the Spirit. This is by Mba Yohannes. If anyone doesn't have a copy of the book, even with the door closed, you can hear. I lost my train of thought. If you don't have a copy of the book, you can grab one up here, or in the email that goes out, the weekly email that goes out, there's a link to a PDF, so you can click on that if you want to put it on your tablet or whatever you want to put on. But I've got a couple more copies over here, so if anyone's interested. It's a great book. Oh, sure. Yeah. Oh, we're actually not... yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Take as many as you want. And Drew's here, so we can start. Go ahead. Thanks, Drew. So we're going to actually cover 3 chapters today, so I'm going to try to go very quickly. Come on in, Negi. Come with us. Join us. We're going to cover 3 chapters today, humility, pride, and honor. What's that? It's a lot. I didn't tell you. Oh, it was in the email. You have to take issue with George on that one. It's okay. We'll just kind of go through it together. And this is one of the... Can you guys see this font when it's this small? I try to make this as big as possible. If you guys want to come closer, you can. I apologize. It's big on the screen, but whenever it's in here, it's not. Maybe bold it, yeah. All right, I'll try something else. But anyway, if you can't see it, come a little closer. I'll just read it to you. So Mba Yohannes starts talking about true humility. And this is one of those topics, I think, that is very, very important for the church. It's sort of the basis of everything. And it's also, yeah, George, help me out. And it's also one of those things that is quite in conflict with the society we live in. And so I think it's one of those very interesting places that I think we need to talk about. Humility is just not one of those things Americans value in general, right? It's not a real American kind of trait. And it's something that's very deeply rooted spiritually in Christian life. So he says, humility is a life one lives between himself and God in which he feels like he is nil and nothing, and whatever good or righteousness he has, it is from God. That's really hard to hear, right? You're living a life where you think of yourself as nothing. Anything good I have comes from God, right? And this is hard, right? But this is the model of humility that we're talking about here. St. John says, "It is not he who insults and blames himself that is humble, but the truly humble can withstand the blame and insult from others without diminishing his love for them." And this is where the rubber hits the road, okay? As adults, whenever we give a humility lesson to kids, it kind of falls on deaf ears, right? Because kids are just humble, Parents yell at them all the time, and they just take it. And the next day, they love you. Adults, however, we don't roll like that, right? When someone insults you, for the most part, we're done with them, right? When someone says something very harsh to you, you're done with them, right? And it takes a really, really long time for that to leave your memory, right? And every time you see that person, you remember what they said. And all of us can, in our lives, but at this point, we know something. We've had an incident now where, as I'm talking, you think, yeah, that person who said that thing, right? And you remember it. And so St. John talks about humility in this term. He says, but the truly humble can withstand the blame and insult from others. That's hard. Without diminishing his love for them. Sounds impossible to me, right? To take blame and insult and not diminish my love for them. So what he's putting up here, these are big things. These are adult things. These are hard things to do, right? And as we grow in our Christian life, something as like humility becomes one of those things that's just very hard to grow in, to become a part of. So we'll talk about it in this chapter, and Amba Johannes gives some great tips. He says it's not just another virtue, it's the basis of all the virtues. And the reason it's the basis of all the virtues is it is the virtue that keeps all the other virtues. If you have any other virtue and you don't have humility, you'll lose that other virtue. And I want you to think of an example very quickly. You know, if you're I don't know, you're on the baseball diamond with some kids, not your own kids, some other kids. Don't worry about it, Mark. Not your kids, some other kids, right? And some kid shows up to you and says, hey, he's a fourth grader. You can't throw. You suck, old man. What are you going to do, right? Some little kid starts talking trash to you really badly, okay? What are you going to do? I'll tell you what I would do. He's going to learn a lesson that day. Right? So I would take it to him, right? And there's a reason why I would do that. It's because at some level, right, it isn't good for that kid to be that arrogant, right? And as parents and as adults, we balance this. We all want to build their self-esteems, at least the moms do, right? And then the dads, we kind of want to make them better, right? And so when we see the kid kind of, doing a bit too much, we kind of say, well, maybe you're not as smart as you think, or maybe not as awesome as you think. And we do this, right? We keep everyone humble in the household because we know that if you have a fourth grader who knows everything and no one can talk to and is above the law, right? When they become a teenager, you're done, right? I mean, if you couldn't handle them as a fourth grader, you can't handle them as a teenager, right? And so at some level, God needs us to be humble so that he can give us more, right? Because if he gives me something and I don't have the humility to handle it, it becomes a problem. It becomes a detriment to me, right? If I ask for something and God gives it to me and it makes me cocky and arrogant and proud and think to myself, I'm better than other people, then God shouldn't have given it to me. It was a detriment to me to take it. So God can't give you if you're not humble, right? So that is the basis of everything. And then the Lord even said, quite starkly, he says, learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart. And we're going to come back to this very important point. He says, learn from me, for I am lowly and gentle in heart. Learn meekness from me, not from a book, not from a sermon, not from some practices. Learn from me directly. Okay? And we're going to cover this very important point here in a second. But the whole reason humility is such an important trait is because it is the trait of Christ. And remember, we are to become Christ-like. So as we become Christ-like, we have to become humble. It's just math, right? It's just going to naturally work that way. Okay? So we'll talk more about this in a second. So humility reinforces itself. The saints who thought they were chief of sinners. And these are real feelings, right? So whenever, you read the Synaxar, you read the Paradise of the Fathers, these are monks, St. Macarius, St. Anthony, and these are great, legendary men, right? Forget the abunas and the bishops we have now. These people were legendary saints. And if you ever talk to one of them, right? And some of these people still exist in Egypt, in the monasteries here in the United States. They'll tell you, I'm one of the worst people around. I'm a horrible person. I'm a sinful person. I'm a weak person. And you're like, dude, cut it, right? You know, like, you did a miracle last week, right? And there are people who do this. And when you speak to them, they still say this. Now, are they faking it? Absolutely not, right? They truly, truly believe it, right? Now, why is that? How can that be? Because I am nowhere near them, and I think I'm all right. So why is it that they, way up here, don't, right? What's missing, okay? Well, what's happening is, the next bullet, how are they having these feelings? The question is, who are they looking at? Who is their focal point, right? Who are they comparing themselves to? When they say, I'm a sinner, that's a comparison, right? A sinner compared to whom? It's clear their gaze is always on Christ. That's their focus. That's who they're looking at when they're making those determinations, okay? Now, when I make determinations, I kind of look around, and I say, I'm better than that guy. I'm better than the guy in the news. I'm better than the guy at work. Certainly better than that deacon or that abuna, right? And I love to pick out people and figure out who I'm better than, right? And we're very good at this, by the way, experts, right? Go through the whole congregation, tell you what's wrong with everybody, okay? It's a skill, right? We all have it. However, these people don't do that. Their focus is on Christ. So, when you're focusing on perfection, it leads to this life. And the analogy that that I've heard before that's very beautiful is, imagine you're in a very dark room, okay? And there's a small candle at the end of the room. And you're wearing a shirt. And you look down at your shirt, and the shirt looks totally clean, okay? And so you think, I'm wearing a very clean shirt. And then as you get a little closer to the light, and you start walking closer to that source of light, you look down and you see big spotches that you hadn't noticed on your white shirt earlier. So you clean those off, and then you look down and you say, shirt's white, shirt's totally clean, best I can tell. And then you walk a little closer to the light. What happens? You look down, now there's some yellow stains that you hadn't noticed earlier, right? You clean those off, and as you walk closer to the light, you start to notice tiny little spots on the shirt. What's happening is that as I get closer to the light, as I get closer to Christ, I start to notice my own blemishes, right? I start to see my own problems. When I'm in the darkness, I think I'm fine. But the light exposes, right? The light exposes, right? And that's why in the Gospel of John it says, those who are sinful hid from the light, didn't want to see the light, rejected the light of Christ. Because it exposes, it embarrasses, right, us. And so as we get closer to God, like I said, humility reinforces itself. As you get closer, you realize how much more I have to go. So these saints who are saying, I'm very sinful, what does that tell you? It means they're very, very close to God. And they see Him, and they see perfection, and they're realistic about their own levels of perfection. And I remember Abuna Krylos was saying this in a sermon maybe 2 months ago. It was a very nice point. He said, the existence of God creates humility, right? So, the only analogy that comes to my mind is, as a professor, every once in a while you come across a real professor, right? Someone from a real school, a legend, right? And I can tell you, all the professors, that thought they're all that, when this guy walks in, everyone's real kind of sheepish and quiet, right? Because there's a legend among them, right? And they know the caliber of this person, right? And the same analogy holds, right? The presence of God induces humility, right? So when someone is not humble, it simply means he doesn't see God in front of him. Because if you really did, you couldn't be arrogant. You couldn't get cocky, right? If really Christ was in front of you and walking before you, it induces humility, right? It's sort of like standing before a king. Everybody gets humble, right? It's like, walking in front of President Obama. Everybody would be humble, right? Because you're in front of someone who's clearly, arguably greater and better. That was for you, Mary. So the presence of God, I have an example about a second grader, but we'll move on. Perfection is induced by the presence of God. So as we get closer to God, we become more humble. And I remember my uncle, Abuno, used to tell me a story. We were taking a walk once, and he showed me we walked by a fruit tree, and the fruit tree had all these fruit. It was, June or something, and the branch was leaning way down. It was almost broken. And he pointed to the fruit tree, and he said, you see that branch? You see how it's heavy? And he said, the saints are like this branch, right? When people are humble and they have a lot of fruit, when people have a lot of fruit, they become humble. And they put their head down. He says, it's the people who don't have any fruit that stick straight up like the branches. I was 18 at the time, and I was like, I think he's right. And you find that the people with all the fruit and all the beauty, they're the ones with their heads down, very humble, and the people without anything, they're sticking right up, and they want everyone to see them, right? And so he gave me this analogy, and it sort of held true in my life. So how do we practice this humility? St. Macarius tells this great story. I think I've told it before, but I'll tell it again. A brother is asking him, what should I do to be humble? And he said, well, I want you to go to the graveyard, and I want you to praise the dead people. I've told you the story. Tonight, middle of the night, go to the grave, a cemetery, and I want you to praise dead people. So he did. He stood there and he praised these dead people. And he said, you were all saints, and you're all magnificent, and you're all incredible. And he went on and praised them. And then he went back, and St. Macarius said, what did they say to you? And he said, they said nothing. They just were dead. He said, okay, now tonight I want you to go to the cemetery, and I want you to curse them. And I want you to tell me what they say to you. So he did. He went that night. And he started cursing all these people. You guys were all awful sinners. You were horrible people. You shouldn't have lived a second longer than you did. I'm glad you're dead. And he just went on, right? And he stopped. What did he hear? Crickets, nothing. So he goes back to St. Macarius and said, what did you hear? He said, nothing. He says, okay, then you should be like these dead people. When people praise you, you should have no reaction. And when people curse you, you should have no reaction, right? You should have that passion crucified. Right? And this is tough to do, right? It's even harder on the praise side than on the cursing side, right? To not react to praise, and we'll talk more about this in a second. So here's some practices that M.B. Ennis suggests. The first one is meditate on one's true self, right? St. James calls our life a vapor that appears for a while then disappears. In fact, that was today's Catholic epistle, was this epistle of St. James. What are you? And in the book, he says, you're just dust, aren't you? I mean, our life is a vapor. It appears for a while, and then it's gone. That's what we are, right? We are dust, and to dust we shall return, right? I don't want to be morbid, but that's the reality of the situation, right? Death and taxes, that's our life. This is what I am, okay? And when you see someone in the hospital and you see someone passed away, you realize the frailty of the body, right? How quickly we are alive 1 second, and how quickly we can be gone another. Right, and you see perfectly healthy people. Now we're all old enough to have experienced these things, who suddenly get cancer and are suddenly gone in 2 months. Right, we're starting to see these things. Okay, so this is what I am, right? And recognizing that for its reality, it's not easy, and it takes introspection, right? Some self-reflection. Like, I'm just a few years, and that's it. Right? That's my life. And certainly we're dust, and to dust we shall return. And then meditating on one's sins and knowing yourself. Everything in the world pushes us away from this. And we've talked about our smartphones and our iPads and the constant entertainment we can have. Nobody wants to be alone with themselves, right? Nobody wants to sit by themselves, take a walk, and just reflect, who am I? What is my weakness? I want to know myself. Knowing yourself is one of the greatest achievements that any person can come to, right? Really understanding who you are and what your weaknesses are, right? And we all like to hide behind personas or jobs or titles or whatever the case may be, but sitting down and really knowing who I am, what am I, and the reality of my being, my own weaknesses, my own flaws, my character flaws, this is true knowledge, right? This is the greatest thing that you can endeavor to do, right? And this comes back to the philosophers from Plato's time, right? Knowing oneself, right? Highly encouraged in the Christian church to sit down and just meditate. Think about yourself. Who am I? What my weaknesses are. And then compare yourself to the saints, not the sinners, right? And this is half the reason we read saint stories, right? When you read the life of a saint, it kind of blows you out of the water a little bit, right? And this is a real byproduct of reading the lives of saints. And so comparing yourself and who you kind of compare yourself to determines your own image of yourself, right? And so what I want to encourage you to do is compare yourself spiritually to the saints, right? As we start to, and this happens all the time, right? As you start to do anything, you start to enter a field like, say you want to become an academic, that's one I know, right? And then you start to find people who are just legendary, right? And then you see, wow, I'm just starting. I don't know anything, right? I start to work out and I think, hey, I'm doing pretty good. Then I go to the gym and I saw these people really good shape. I think, wow, I haven't even started, right? You see people really in good shape or really intellectuals. Saints are the exact same way, right? As I start my spiritual struggle, I can easily start to say, hey, I'm not so bad. And then I start reading the lives of the saints and I start comparing the way they think and the way they approach things with the way I do, and I realize I haven't even started this journey, right? So putting before us examples of saints constantly is key, right? That's huge because it gives us that role model of what we should be. All right. The true source of humility. So, all right, so let me just go through this and So St. Paul calls this the mind of Christ, humility. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God, made himself of no reputation. Okay? So I'll read that again. Who being in the form of God, made himself of no reputation. So the true example of humility in the Christian church is Christ himself. The ultimate example of humility. The infinite example of humility, right? Every once in a while, I'm speaking about myself, but, we all get delusions of grandeur, right? We kind of start to think of ourselves, I'm pretty smart, I'm pretty this, I'm pretty that, right? I've got it together. And we sometimes we prop ourselves up in a way that is unrealistic and incompatible with who we really are. And Christ gives us this example and says, look, I was God, and I came down and became a man. Right? So look at the contrast, if you will, an infinite level of humility. And the examples are numerous. He was born in a manger. He allowed John the Baptist to baptize him. He washed the feet of the disciples. He entered Jerusalem, on a donkey. And then the cross itself. All of these are amazing feats of humility when you think about who Christ was, right? I mean, when President Obama, takes off his suit and puts on a pair of basketball shorts and a T-shirt and plays basketball, everyone goes, wow, what a humble guy. He's so humble. Isn't that great? He's the president, and he's wearing a T-shirt and shorts, right? And you think, big freaking deal, right? He's a man, and he's wearing some T-shirt and shorts, and everyone goes nuts because he's the president, right? Now imagine, take that, line from president to God, from shorts and a T-shirt to born with cows and a donkey, right? And look at the delta on that, right? The level of humility. It's amazing. It's mind-blowing, right? If we truly believe who Christ is, what he was, what he is, then it's mind-blowing, right? What the level of humility is. So this brings me to my next point. We cannot work on it. So when someone says, I have to be humble, you can't work on that, right? So every once in a while in Sunday school when we were growing up, someone would say, okay, this week, everybody, we're going to practice prayer. And this week, we're going to practice fasting. And this week, we're going to practice being humble. And this week, we're going to practice being forgiving. Humility is one of those things that you can't just do, right? So all of us are going to say, okay, that's it. Mark gave a lesson on humility. I read this great book. I'm going to be humble. It's very hard to do it that way because humility comes from the inside, right? Humility comes from a life merged with Christ. It isn't something I can impose from the outside. It's not something I can fake. It's not something I say, okay, gotta be humble, gotta be humble. It rather is something that fuses when we become part of Christ, right? So if I just told you Christ is the infinite example of humility, okay? Last week we talked about communion, where I become part of Christ, right? If Christ is infinitely humble, and then I become part of Christ, don't I take on that characteristic of infinite humility? That's how I become humble. I become part of Christ, who is humble, right? You know, we've all had friends who talk a certain way or act a certain way, and after a while you find that you talk that same way, right? You say the same things and you say the same jokes, especially like in junior high and high school. You'd have a friend that would say something, and after a while you find yourself saying it, right? You talk that way, and you think that way, and you make the same joke. You've acquired their characteristics through proximity, right? Just by being close to them, interacting with them every day, talking with them, riding your bike with them, doing whatever. Next thing you know, you start acting and talking just like they do. This is how we assimilate Christ, right? Because by being close to Christ, talking to Christ, reading about Christ's life, we start to take on these characteristics. Now I'm going to take it a step further. Unlike, you know, I can read about Charles Dickens, right, and I can learn all about his life, and I can, you know, start to talk the way Charles Dickens talked, okay? But this is very different from learning about Christ because of communion, right? Because I don't just learn about Christ or hear his words, I become part of Christ, right? In a real mysterious way, right? That's what communion is. So attaining these characteristics of humility, I'm not just going to learn by reading about it, but rather by participating in it. Does that make sense? And the verse that I'm going to cover here in a second, God gives grace to the humble, right? God gives us this grace to become a part of it, to part of him. Okay. Tips for humility. First one, do not utter in front of others that which makes them praise you. And I wrote Facebook on there. So I'm on Facebook. I know you guys are on Facebook. I don't want to say anything bad against Facebook. I'm not allowed to say anything bad against Facebook. However, you know, I was reading this book, and that one just struck me. Do not utter in front of others that which makes them praise you. I mean, these are the old-timers, right? These are the Emba Ennises of the world. These are the spiritual guys. And he's saying, don't say anything that would make someone praise you. And I thought to myself, you know, 2 weeks ago, I ran a marathon. And so the first thing I did, I took a picture of me. After I'd finished the marathon, I had my finisher medal on my chest. My friend had flown in from Seattle to run it with me. We took a picture together. I have a smartphone. One button later, it's on Facebook. I just ran my first marathon. Here's my time. Here's my finisher medal. Here's me. I'm awesome. Go. Right? What was I expecting to get? Well, what did I get? Over and over, right? Every line that came in was like, you're great. You're such a role model. You're so inspirational. Good for you at your age. Right? And, you know, and every time, and how many people liked my photo? I looked. And every time I got an email, I'd look and I'd say, yeah, that's a good compliment. That's right. I am an inspiration, aren't I? And after a while, it started to get to me. And then I realized, well, gee, why did I post that picture? Other than for people to say, good job, Mark, you're awesome. Right? Now, there's lots of reasons to post, and not everyone is as bad as I am. But let's be aware of this, right? I mean, just because the technology's out there, and just because everyone's embraced it, doesn't make it right? And let me be a little controversial here. If 300 million people embrace something, most of whom are not Christian, and they think it's awesome, then you should be a little worried, right? When so many people who have no Christian values whatsoever think this is a great thing to do. We as Christians should be just a little bit more wary and say, well, hold on, right? Maybe I want to post pictures of my kids. I want to keep in contact with my relatives. Fine, no problem. Of course, I'm not saying don't do Facebook. I'm just saying don't do what I did. Right? Be careful that, we don't do things to get the praise of men. And I realized as I was writing this lesson, 2 days ago, I was like, gee, that's exactly why I posted that picture, was to get a whole bunch of positive, I'm awesome feedback. Yes, Justin. I think a lot of people wrote that to me. It was, yes.
So, not that I'm disagreeing, I think I agree with just
Play devil's advocate.
yeah. You're not, you're not asking for praise about who you are as a person. You're not saying I'm a good guy. This is an accomplishment like I got a degree or whatever. Part of me feels like, what's wrong with getting praise for that and even seeking it? If it's not, if it's not praise about something that's more.
So Mary's asking what's wrong with as long as you're not seeking that praise, and devil's a smart guy. So it starts off in one way, right? But I can assure you that, when I got the email saying someone else has made a comment, I'd look. And when it was positive, I kind of let that get to me, right? So you have to be very careful, right? And I guess the other answer is it depends how close we're getting to the light, right? If we're really far away, hey, there's nothing wrong with it. But you take someone like the story of St. Mary of Egypt, whose story we never quite finish every single week, so it ends really good. But we'll let you know one of these years. You take someone like her, right, and she wanted zero praise, right? So all of a sudden you see the saints who've lived this amazing life, and you see what they're doing. You think, well, gee, they wouldn't have posted anything on Facebook, right? In fact, you take some people like Mberwiz, amazing saint. There are some saints, like the one my daughter's named after, Saint Anna Simone. She tried to act crazy. I mean, she was queen and tried to act like she was nuts, and didn't let anyone know who she was or what she was doing, and she would clean toilets in a monastery so that no one praised her. That's a very different thing than, hey, look at what I did, right? So, we have to be careful of going down that road, right? Now, I mean, sometimes we're sharing, relatives, and it's understandable, but it's easy to go down that road. And I'll just take this a step further. I mean, I think a lot of things in the media, if you have a population that is very me-focused, right, technology comes out that allows you to say, I'm going to tweet about myself all the time, right? That's a very alluring thing that you can run away with. If someone praises you, quickly praise God. This is something, we can all work on, right? Thanks be to God, right, for everything in me, everything I do, everything I say, everything I think. Don't do a deed so that others will praise you. Again, this is just home cooking, chicken soup kind of advice, right? Don't do anything so anyone sees you, right? Hide everything. Don't let anyone know what you're doing, right? That's the best outcome. Don't let anyone know about anything you're doing. Do not justify the wrongs you do. Esteem all people better than yourself. Do not choose the best place or the front, as Christ said in his parable about the person who comes and sits in the front and then someone asks you to go sit in the back. Don't always pick the best spot for yourself and your family. If you're in a gathering, this is real important. Do not speak before others and appear learned, right? I mean, it always strikes me, right, when there's 6 people around a table, you should speak 1/6 of the time, and I like to cut it to 1/12 just to make sure I'm not over that, right? And then there's always the person who thinks they should speak, 9/11 of the time, right? So, be aware of these things. These are, again, these tips of how to remain humble. Good to hear. So I want you to look at all of these. Here, I'll let them all come in. Make some chaos. Party hats. Very nice. The kids learned today about Jesus inviting everybody to the party. And they learned that a party is what you do when you want people who love you to come to you. And so Jesus has invited all of us to the party because he loves us and he wants us to be there. Is that right? Okay. So I want you to look at all these characteristics very quickly, and I want you to imagine for a moment the human being who is the opposite of all these characteristics. Imagine the person who only talks to you and tells you, praise me. Everything they say, and I know people like this, everything they tell you, you have to end with, wow, you're awesome. I mean, that's really the only way to finish their sentences. If someone praises you, they take the praise. They do stuff so that other people praise them. They esteem everyone beneath themselves. They always take the front. They always justify themselves. What kind of person is this? It's a monster, right? The opposite of all of these points is a monster. Is not a person you want to be around very long, right? So imagine all of these things as you're trying to think about humility. All right, I'll try to go quickly. I think I've only got a few more slides. St. Paul says, if so, I may also boast a little. I boast in my weakness, therefore most gladly I will rather boast in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Again, I have to draw the contrast to Facebook. Therefore most gladly I would rather boast in my infirmities. I would rather boast in my weakness. That is a stark contrast to what we see, right? This is St. Paul's talking. Do we have a self-esteem obsession in the United States? Probably, right? We see this when we see kids, with schools and everything's all about self-esteem. And I'm not saying self-esteem is bad. I don't have much of it, but I hear it's a good thing. However, do we have a little bit too much? Maybe, right? And as Christians, we have to be a little wary of this. Putting all the esteem on the children versus what? God who is in the children, right? So instead of saying, you're a great runner, thank God you're a great runner. You're a smart boy, thank God you're a smart boy, right? You're a nice person, thank God you're a nice person, right? Let's boast in Christ who's in us as opposed to us who's in us. So last thing I'll say is pride often conceals itself in virtues. And this is something to be very wary of as Christians. Servants often have this issue, right? Whenever you give a nice lesson and all the kids come up to you and say, thank you for the nice lesson, this is a source of pride, right? Hi, Habibi. What am I doing? I'm talking. I'm giving. Mm-hmm. You want to give me that? Thank you. I'll put it in the garbage. Having a nice voice while chanting, right? Can we become puffed up from pride from our singing abilities? I mean, I do, but helping others, first thing that Satan does once he cannot stop the good deed. I just want to point out this one thing. Satan is always going to try to stop us from doing anything good. As soon as we do something good and he fails, the first thing he's going to do is tell you you're good. And be very aware of this, right? Whenever you do anything in church, immediately Satan is going to come and tell you, look what you did. What did that other person do? Those people never help. Those people just show up and they don't help out. But you help out. You do things. You got a party hat. That's a party hat. That's a nice one. You can have it back. I don't care. It's fine. He's entertaining. And St. John says, great is he who refuses the praise of people, and greater is he who refuses the praise of devils. So I want to tell you a story about Abuna Bishoy Kamel, and I'll end on this story. Abuna Bishoy Kamel once gave a very, very nice sermon. And as he was leaving, someone came up to him and said, Abuna, that was a wonderful sermon. Does anyone know what Abuna Bishoy Kamel's response was? He turned to the man and he said, the devil told me that a second before you did. The devil told me that a second before you did. So when he ended his sermon, the first thing that he heard in his own ear, as a Bunapshor Kamen, was, that was a great sermon. You did it. You knocked that one out of the park. Right? So he turned to the man and he said, Satan just told me the same thing. Right? So look at the one above it. Great is he who refuses the praise of people, and greater is he who refuses the praise of devils. Devils will praise us all the time. You can do anything. You can just stop sinning, and the devil will praise you for that. And be very aware of this. This is why I personally, after I heard this story from Abuna Bishoy Kemel, have never complimented a speaker after a talk. Ever. Right? For their own salvation. Right? For the speaker's own salvation, don't tell him he did a good job or she did a good job. Right? Satan already did that. Right? So for their own salvation, you don't praise them. Okay? I think we're done. Any questions, comments? Sorry, I went a little late. Oh. Thank you, Mary. All right. Let's stand up and pray. Glory be to God forever. Amen. Lord, hear us when we say to you with all thanksgiving, Our Father who art in heaven.